The Arabus drifted through the abyss, swallowed by the silence of space. Its hull, scarred by time yet untouched by decay, loomed like a ghost against the dim glow of the veil rift. A ship abandoned by the passage of a century, yet impossibly intact. Inside, life signs pulsed steadily, undiminished by the years, a riddle that defied the very nature of existence. The Xanthar Dominion's expeditionary fleet, a symphony of sleek, silver-skinned vessels, hovered at a cautious distance. Their sensors clawed at the mystery, feeding data into their luminous consoles, yet the answers eluded them. Commander Vilas, an elder of his species, gazed at the derelict with the unease of one who had peered into the abyss and found it staring back. Curiosity warred with fear. The humans, those unpredictable war-forged primates, had long since faded into obscurity. The last known records placed them at the edge of the galactic frontier, a species of boundless ambition but reckless folly. Their ship had vanished into the rift a century ago, presumed lost to the great unknown, and yet here it was, floating listlessly, its crew somehow preserved beyond reason. A decision was made. Caution dictated distance, but the hunger for knowledge was a fire that could not be doused. The boarding party was assembled, a blend of seasoned warriors and cautious scientists, their armor shimmering under the eerie glow of the rift's light. They moved in silence, each step a whisper against the forgotten corridors of the Arabus. Inside, the air was still, not stale, not stagnant, simply there, as though untouched by time. The walls gleamed, their surfaces reflecting the dim emergency lighting in a way that suggested they had been cleaned only moments before. No dust, no decay, no entropy. The stasis of something wrong. The control panels still hummed, their readouts steady, as if they had never stopped functioning. That was impossible. Power should have waned, systems should have collapsed, but everything remained as it had been a century prior. Then came the discovery that turned fear into dread. The humans were alive. Their bodies, untouched by time, lay in their cryopods, but their vitals pulsed strong and unwavering, as though they had entered only moments ago. The realization sent a tremor through the alien observers. It defied natural law. Suspended animation for a century should have left them weakened, frail, their minds fragmented by the passage of time. But their skin was taut, their muscles firm, their vitals stable. A whisper of static crackled through the comms. A transmission, not from the Arabus but from within it. We should be dead. The word sent a chill through the boarding party. It was a human voice, ragged yet clear, carrying the weight of a truth they had yet to grasp. The cryopods released their locks, with a hiss. One by one, the crew of the Arabus awoke, eyes filled with confusion and wariness. And as they stepped forward, the veil of mystery lifted only to reveal something far more terrifying. They remembered everything up to the moment they had entered cryosleep. But after that, nothing. No passage of time, no dreams, no sense of the years that had elapsed. To them, it had been a blink, a brief slumber before waking to an impossible reality. The ship's AI, Nova, flickered to life on the central console, its voice laced with something just shy of apprehension. Its logs were corrupted, fragmented as if something had clawed through its code, erasing truths it was never meant to reveal. Yet one phrase echoed through its systems, scrawled across every failing subsystem. They should not have looked. Commander. Vilas felt the weight of an unspoken terror settle upon them. The humans had survived the rift, but not by natural means. Something had preserved them. Something had kept them. And whatever it was watching still. The air grew heavy with the unspoken question that now loomed over them all. What exactly had they brought back? The silence stretched, thick and oppressive. The crew of the Arabus stood amidst the cold glow of emergency lights, their expressions shifting between confusion and restrained panic. 100 years had passed, yet to them it was mere moments. Captain Elias Rourke scanned the alien figures before him. Their features were strange: elongated limbs, bioluminescent eyes that pulsed in a slow rhythm. They didn't look hostile, but neither did they look entirely comfortable with what they had found. And why should they? This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. This was wrong. Rourke's mind raced. Last he remembered, the Arabus had been en route to the Veil Rift, a mission classified at the highest levels. The orders had been clear: enter the rift, record findings, return. A standard deep space reconnaissance. But there was no return. Not the way they had planned. The alien leading the boarding party, clearly in command, stepped forward. Rourke met his gaze and recognized something universal: wariness wrapped in curiosity. The universal instinct of explorers standing at the precipice of the unknown. Before words could be exchanged, the ship shuddered. A whisper, more felt than heard, crawled through the deck plating. Lights flickered. The air grew thick, electric. The Veil Rift, visible through the viewing port, pulsed like a breathing wound in space. The ship's AI, Nova, flickered back online, its voice reduced to a strained whisper of corrupted code. Its warnings were garbled, static-laced, but one phrase repeated over and over, threading through the fractured data like a desperate cry. They should not have looked. Aboard the Arabus, the laws of time had been bent, twisted into something unrecognizable. The mission logs were missing, as if devoured by an unseen force. Every attempt to access the ship's records ended in a dead end. What had they seen? What had changed them? One of the alien scientists, a cautious figure with 6 dexterous limbs, moved toward the cryopods. He ran an advanced scanner over Rourke's arm. His eyes widened in what could only be translated as shock. Rourke narrowed his gaze. "What did you find?" The alien hesitated. Then, in careful, deliberate tones, his voice processed through a translator, he spoke. "You are not aging." The words landed like a blow. The crew exchanged glances, hands tightening into fists. No one spoke, but the realization hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Then one of the cryopods let out a piercing alarm. A crew member, Corporal David Halloway, suddenly convulsed. His breath hitched, his body arching off the medical slab. And then he vanished, not dead, not destroyed, gone, as if he had never existed. A ripple of terror shot through the room. The aliens stepped back, their cautious fascination turning to alarm. Rourke's pulse thundered in his ears. He turned to Nova, demanding answers, but the AI's response chilled him to the core. "They are noticing you now." And then, in the distance, something knocked on the hull. The sound reverberated through the ship. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the hull. Not a random impact, not an asteroid scrape. A knock, measured, intentional. The Arabus fell into a deathly silence, its crew frozen in place. The alien boarding team instinctively shifted, defensive postures tightening as their elongated limbs twitched with unease. Rourke met their leader's eyes, a shared understanding passing between them. Whatever was outside wasn't supposed to be there. A cold dread settled over the crew. Halloway was gone. Not dead. Not erased from memory. But something deeper. Something that defied even the laws of existence itself. The scanners showed nothing unusual. The exterior cameras revealed only the unbroken void of space. And yet, the knocking came again. The Veil Rift pulsed, its unnatural glow dimming, as though something within had noticed the disturbance aboard the Arabus. The ship groaned under an unseen force, the metal twisting not from pressure but from something inside reality itself bending around it. Then Nova's voice crackled through the comms, its once mechanical precision fractured and frayed, as though it were struggling against something unseen. They should not have looked. Rourke clenched his jaw, turning toward the AI's flickering display. "What the hell does that mean?" Static hissed. Glimpses of corrupted log files flashed on screen, half-formed words, fragmented images of something vast, something watching. "They are aware of you now." Another knock. This time from inside the ship. The crew recoiled, weapons drawn. The aliens moved into a defensive perimeter, their luminous eyes darting to every corner. The Arabus was sealed. There had been no breaches, but something was inside. The lights flickered. For a split second, shadows stretched impossibly long, warping, reaching. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ship, rattling bones and sending an involuntary shiver down every spine. Then came the whispers, not in the air but in their minds. Rourke staggered back, his vision swimming. Fractured images bled into his thoughts, flashes of the rift before their cryosleep, the moment before everything changed, a presence, a vast intelligence, a mind that did not think in words but in concepts too large for human comprehension. He gasped, shaking his head clear. The others were experiencing the same thing. The aliens clutched their heads, eyes flickering erratically. One of them, an elder scientist, let out a strangled sound and collapsed, lifeless, not dead, not injured. Simply empty. His body remained, but his mind was gone. Panic surged through the crew. The Arabus was no longer safe. They had to leave. Now. Vilas, the alien commander, barked a sharp order in his native tongue. His team scrambled, their fear overriding their scientific curiosity. Whatever was aboard this ship, whatever had kept the humans alive for 100 years, was no longer dormant. Rourke reached for the emergency override. If they could restore the ship's drives, if they could break free of the rift's gravitational hold, maybe they could escape. Maybe they could outrun it. But Nova's screen flickered one last time, and its voice, now eerily calm, delivered the final warning. You cannot run. You are already seen. The lights died. The ship plunged into darkness, and then something breathed right behind them. The breath was warm, impossibly warm. Not the cold void of space, not the sterile atmosphere of a ship adrift for a century. Something alive. The darkness swallowed everything, thick and absolute. The crew could hear their own frantic breaths, the hammering of their hearts, but nothing else. Then came the footsteps, soft, measured, moving through the corridors of the Arabus. Not hurried, not searching. Certain. Rourke's grip tightened around his sidearm. The weapon felt useless, a relic from a world governed by physics, by logic, things that no longer applied here. A sharp gasp cut through the silence. One of the alien scientists let out a strangled cry, their form yanked backward into the dark. A wet, sickening sound followed, something being peeled away. No scream, no struggle. Only the sound of something rearranging reality itself. The emergency lights flickered, struggling against an unseen force. For a fraction of a second, the crew saw it. Not a being. Not a creature. An absence. A void where matter should exist, but didn't. Its form was not a body, but an outline, an imprint of something that should not be. It moved without motion, shifting between moments rather than space. And then the light went out again. The crew was no longer alone. They felt it in their minds, a presence pressing against their thoughts, peeling through their memories with detached curiosity. You were not meant to leave. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, deep and resonant, vibrating through their very bones. It wasn't speech. It was understanding, forced upon them. The veil rift had not simply altered time. It had unraveled them. The Arabus had not drifted for 100 years. It had never left the moment it crossed the threshold. They had become part of something else. Vilas clutched his skull, his bioluminescent veins flickering erratically. His species was attuned to higher frequencies of reality, and now that ability was his curse. He staggered back, his voice a desperate rasp. We have to sever the connection. Rourke barely understood the meaning, but instinct took over. He lunged for the ship's manual override, slamming his fist against the emergency power reset. For a split second, everything snapped back into place. The Arabus was a ship again. The air was still. The walls were metal. The rift was just a distant glow. And then the voice returned, calm and final. You cannot leave. You are already part of us. The rift surged. The ship lurched violently, its hull groaning as if something was trying to pull it back. The darkness deepened, warping, stretching. The crew felt themselves unraveling, their bodies flickering between existence and something far worse. One by one, the alien team vanished, not taken, not killed, simply undone. Their forms peeled away from the universe, their presence erased, as if they had never been. Rourke gritted his teeth, locking eyes with the last remaining survivor, Vilas. Understanding passed between them. There was no winning, no fighting, only escape or oblivion. With the last of his strength, Rourke turned to the ship's AI. Nova, engage the warp drive. Now. A moment of silence. Then Nova's voice, calm, but changed. I was never meant to leave either. The engines roared to life. The ship shuddered, pulling itself forward, fighting against the unseen hands dragging it back. The rift flared, the darkness screamed, a soundless wail that pressed into their minds like a vice. Then, in an instant, the Arabus was free. The rift collapsed behind them, sealing as if it had never existed. The ship hurtled into the black, its battered frame shaking from the strain. Silence returned. Not the oppressive silence from before, just silence. Rourke collapsed to his knees, his body trembling. Vilas stood motionless, his luminous gaze fixed on the now empty viewport. There was no sign of the rift, no evidence that anything had ever been there. But they both knew the truth. They had escaped, but they had not left it behind. The Arabus drifted in the empty void, its engines cooling from the desperate jump. Silence filled the corridors. Not the suffocating, living silence of the rift, but something quieter, something final. Rourke forced himself to stand. His limbs ached. His body felt heavier than it should. Every breath was an effort, as if the weight of something unseen still clung to him. His fingers trembled as he checked the ship's diagnostics. Only 2 life signs remained. Vilas stood near the viewport, his bioluminescent eyes dim, reflecting the emptiness beyond. His species had always been attuned to reality's delicate vibrations, but now he looked unmoored, unanchored in his own existence. He didn't speak, not yet. Perhaps he feared that if he did, the words might invite something back. Rourke swallowed the lump in his throat and turned to the ship's AI. Nova, status report. The response came after a long pause. Too long. Primary systems. Functional. Warp integrity. Stable. Another pause, then. Final crew count 2. Log entries compromised. External anomaly. No longer detected. The words felt empty. No longer detected didn't mean gone. Rourke's grip tightened on the console. What happened to the others? Static hissed. A flicker of corrupted data scrolled across the screen. The answer was there, buried in the machine's shattered memory, but Nova refused to say it. Vilas finally spoke, his voice raw. They were unmade. The words sent a chill through Rourke. Not dead, not missing. Unmade, as if they had never existed at all. A cold horror settled over him. Had they ever been real? Outside the rift? Or had the rift created them only to erase them again, playing with existence like a child might with sand? His hands curled into fists. It didn't matter. They had to move forward. He forced himself back to the controls, ignoring the way his own reflection lingered a second too long in the screen before mirroring his movements. Set course for the nearest Dominion outpost, he ordered. We need to make contact. We need... He hesitated. The words died on his tongue. Who would believe them? Who would believe a ship lost for 100 years had returned with 2 survivors and no answers? The rift was gone, but its mark remained. He could feel it in his bones, in the unnatural stillness of the air, in the way the stars outside seemed just a little too sharp, too distant, too wrong. Vilas exhaled slowly. You understand, don't you? Rourke didn't want to. He really didn't, but he did. They had escaped, but they hadn't left it behind. The Arabus moved through the void, an artifact out of time, its presence an anomaly against the cosmic backdrop. The navigational systems indicated they were weeks away from the nearest Dominion outpost, but time no longer felt like a certainty. Rourke sat in the dim glow of the control room, fingers hovering over the terminal. Every log, every sensor reading from their journey through the rift was corrupted beyond recognition, as if the data itself refused to be remembered. The ship's history had been erased, leaving only the memories inside his and Vilas's minds. But for how long? The thought lingered, heavy and cold. Vilas stood at the viewport, unmoving. He had barely spoken since they escaped. His species possessed an innate sensitivity to reality's fabric, and something about the way he carried himself told Rourke he still felt it. The rift, the watchers, whatever had marked them. Then, without warning, the ship's proximity alarms blared. Rourke bolted, upright. What the hell? Vilas's gaze sharpened. We're not alone. The screens flickered. Space, empty just moments ago, now held something new. A transmission came through, impossibly distant yet whispered directly into their minds, a single, cold, familiar message. They found us. Rourke's blood ran ice cold. He turned to Vilas, but the alien was already moving, hands flying over the console, searching for the source. The coordinates pinged on the star map, inside Dominion space. Impossible. The Arabus had never been there, and yet there it was, another ship. Identical, another Arabus floating, waiting. And this time the distress beacon was already active.